Super Mario Sunshine, at its core, is a game about running, jumping, and spraying stuff. So it should come as no surprise that when you take away one of those three things, that the game becomes pretty unplayable.
Ron's dead.
But instead of removing one of those aspects, what if we change it out with something else? What if we replace the ability to spray water with FLUDD with, I don't know, something like barrels? Well, that's what I've set off to figure out. Can you beat Super Mario Sunshine by only using barrels? Before we can get into this run, I think it would make sense if I explain the rules first. Rule 1, FLUDD may not be used ever. If FLUDD is used, then the run will be considered failed. Rule 2. To succeed, I must beat the game without breaking any rules. The game is considered beaten once Mario defeats Bowser. Rule 3. Major skips may only be used if it's the only option. A major skip is defined by something that lets Mario skip a shine sprite or several shine sprites in a non-intended manner. Rule 4. Since barrels appear a whole lot less than they do, I've taken the liberty to custom mod barrels into each level. I'm allowed to mod in as many barrels as I need for any specific level. And finally, there will be some rules that are specific to certain levels for some added difficulty. However, instead of overloading you guys on rules right now, we'll just cross that bridge once we get there. That's enough talking, let's get into some gameplay. So, starting off at the airstrip, of course, my first plan of action was to get rid of all the goop. And of course, after that, I decided to try and spawn the polluted piranha. And already, I hit my first roadblock. You see, to spawn a polluted piranha, you have to keep dealing consecutive damage to the goop mound thing. So basically, if it stops flashing red, then its hit points get reset. This is, of course, normally trivial when using FLUDD, but we don't have that luxury. In fact, when using barrels, it's pretty much impossible to awaken the polluted piranha by throwing barrels at it. So instead, I decided to try a new strategy that basically revolved around bursting 2 barrels at once, which failed. I then tried a modified version of that strategy, which also failed, but also resulted in a happy accident. You see how I broke open those 2 barrels without even picking them up? After a bit of testing, I learned that if you have some momentum when going to pick up a barrel, that they'll actually just break open instantly. Unfortunately, the window to do this is a little precise. You see, if you press the B button too early, then Mario will slide, then bonk onto the barrel, which is no good. And if you press B too late, then Mario will lose all of his momentum because, you know, there's a barrel in the way. And of course, Mario will then just pick up the barrel. Fortunately though, while it's still fairly precise, it's really not that hard to pull off consistently. And after a few tries, I was able to awaken the polluted piranha with this setup. Moving on to the polluted piranha itself, the fight went exactly as you'd expect. I just threw barrels at it, nothing interesting. I then collected my shine sprite, then moved on to the plaza. The first Delfino Plaza polluted piranha was similar yet different to the one from the airstrip. For starters, the swoop and stews made it a bit more difficult, especially because their goop actually presents a hazard for not just Mario, but the barrels themselves. I never knew this before now, but barrels actually sink into goop, which actually makes too much sense. And to top it all off, since this goop mound thing actually emits goop around it, I couldn't get the barrels as close to it as I would have liked. So instead, I basically played a game of RNG, because the barrel's water spread is completely random, for much too long. What you're watching is at 10 times speed and isn't even half of the time I spent doing this. I, however, was eventually able to barely awaken the polluted piranha to my luck. And of course, this fight wasn't much more different than the one from the airstrip. Now, what comes next is what would easily become one of the most tedious themes of this run, Shadow Mario. So not only does the water from the barrels sometimes just refuse to hit Shadow Mario, but they also do very little damage to him. And well, it's probably just best to show you again at 10 times speed. But then, finally, after too much time spent, I was able to take Shadow Mario out. I then chased him to the Pianta statue, had a really pathetic attempt at a quick M, then had to use a unique setup to actually open the M portal. So now that I'm in Bianco 1, now is actually a great time to explain one of the more niche rules I put into place. Since there are a lot of levels in Sunshine that don't necessarily require FLUDD, but really just need you to get from point A to point B, I decided that for all of those A to B levels, that a restriction would be in place that requires Mario to take a barrel from point A to point B. It's not important that Mario is carrying the barrel the whole time, but it's important that the barrel is taken to point B with Mario. This isn't like a hard rule, so the challenge won't fail if I can't do this, but it's a restriction that I will always do if I am able to. And in the case of Bianco 1, this actually means a barrel must be carried from spawn all the way up to PD Piranha. I actually had a few challenging jumps up the windmill since I'm now not only without FLUDD, but also Mario's dive. This jump was mostly just hard because the camera keeps the windmill in the center, and I'm not particularly used to spin jumps that aren't in the forward direction. But after a few attempts, I made it across the gap. And of course, the jump that immediately followed was also of some difficulty, since it was basically made for you to hover around. But after trying some more questionable strategies, I was able to make it across with some YCam shenanigans. And now it was time for my first barrel-only boss battle, none other than PD Piranha. Now, this fight went pretty much as I expected. The only thing that took me a little by surprise was how hard it became to manage keeping the surrounding area clean enough to avoid the various hazards like the stupid stews and the piranha plants, while also still, filling PD up. But otherwise, it was mostly just making sure I threw barrels in the right places at the right time. While the fight overall was pretty tedious, it also wasn't mind-numbing. It was actually kind of fun and certainly a hell of a lot more involved than the normal speedrun strats for PD. Now, moving on to Bianco 3, the only real difficulty was getting up to the cave itself, but after using this path for the first time probably ever, I was able to enter the secret, which itself was just slower than usual, if anything. Skipping Bianco 4, since it was pretty uninteresting, was Bianco 5, and man, PD went from being kinda interesting to real boring real quick. But before I actually get into that fight, I first have to go over waking up PD first. As it stands, it's impossible to actually wake him up with a barrel. The only way to wake him up is with these little guys, which of course uses FLUDD. Maybe. Shooting one of them off actually doesn't drain your tank at all, so it's up to you individually as a viewer to decide if this fails the challenge or not. Be sure to leave me a comment telling me what you think about this. Anyways, after waking up PD, the first challenge showed itself: how to actually get PD onto the ground. He doesn't fly low enough to pop a barrel on the ground, and barrels don't seem to break on contact with him either, so I had to come up with something. After some time, I found out that if I got lucky, I could break a barrel on this rooftop to bring him down, and what ensued afterwards was basically the same as the first fight as one could expect. I rinsed and repeated, tried to rinse and repeat again, but got stuck on this rope and let PD fly away, but I eventually was able to take him down. Now, you don't really get to see the full extent of this, since I have to keep the pace for the video, but just know since that where PD decides to fly is RNG based, and the barrel water spread is also RNG based, this fight took frustratingly long to complete. It was 90% just waiting. Anyways, after PD was the second secret level of Bianco Hills, and oh boy, did the game have a field day with me here. The challenge of this level was to land upon these logs, but since I don't have FLUDD or Mario's dive, the only way to make it to those logs is to spin jump from the windmill, and spin jumping off the windmill is a challenge because the camera forces you to make the jump blind. And let me show you what that meant for me with this montage. Finally, after too many attempts, I made it. I then made 3 careful jumps, then entered the secret. It was a cakewalk. Finally, it was time for Shadow Mario. Let me redo that line. Finally, it was time for Shadow Mario. Much better. My only saving grace here was that I was able to manipulate his AI to go between these 2 points, which certainly made his movements a lot more predictable. But on the downside, that made this all the more repetitive, as I can show you by this small sample of the overall experience. Eventually, I got to a point where Shadow Mario was no longer taking damage from my barrels, and this was beyond a fluke, so I knew something was up. As it turns out, when you take him down to 0 hit points, you have to deal damage to him when he's on the move. Otherwise, he won't faint or trip or whatever he does when you defeat him. Anyways, I took him down and it was time to move on from Bianco. Next was the polluted piranha that gatekeeps Ricco Harbor, and well, I had a lot of trouble with it. I couldn't get barrels remotely close to the goop mound thing, since it keeps a consistent perimeter of goop around it that'll just suck my barrels into it. I tried many things, including just throwing barrels in vain. I then decided I wanted to see if I could do damage to it from under, so I went to the beach and tried to do the walk underwater glitch when this happened. Yeah, so for some reason, the beach counts as goop or something when the lighthouse is beneath its weird goop mound thing. However, at the complete opposite side of the beach, I was able to properly place the barrel down and get myself underwater. I made my way over to the weird goop mound thing, and for testing purposes decided to see if I could deal damage to it with Flood, which I couldn't. And for safety, I also tested it with a barrel, but to no avail. I tried one more thing before I had to just take a break. During my break, I fused and unfused 2 coconuts, stacked barrels on top of their collision skews, and did some sick movement practice. Afterwards, I came up with a new idea, which I tested with a moon jump hack. I wanted to see if I could somehow drop a bunch of barrels out of the boathouse interior, which, if you didn't know, is physically above the boathouse. But barrels, unfortunately, sank into the invisible ground up there, so it was a no-go. So finally, I gave in and used Flood to awaken the polluted piranha. But don't worry, cause I still used barrels to kill it. And after using a slightly modified setup to open the M portal, I was finally in Ricco Harbor. Aside from this funny animation and this jump that required the use of a GWK, or glitchy wall kick, there wasn't much in the way between Mario and Gooper Blooper, and once in the fight, as with PD, it went pretty much as you'd expect it to go with barrels. I threw barrels at GB, used the speedrun strats to deal damage early, and got out with a brand new shiny Shine Sprite. Ricco 2 was the exact same as intended pretty much, and so was Ricco 3, except I did have to think about my pathing. Ricco 4 was easy, and the only thing of note with Ricco 5 is that I got to see attacks I actually completely forgot Gooper Blooper had. Skipping Ricco 6 as it wasn't any different is of course Ricco 7, aka Shadow Mario, yay. It was the same as any other Shadow Mario level. After Ricco, I decided to go the vanilla route and continue onto Gelato Beach. Since the Lighthouse Polluted Piranha had the same obstacles as the Boathouse one, I had to use Flood to awaken it and unlock Gelato. Almost. I actually had a ton of trouble with getting the M portal to open up. After about half an hour of trying over and over with save states, I decided to cave and just open it with Flood. I'm sure there is some way to open up the portal floodless, but I couldn't figure it out. As for Gelato Beach, it, much like Ricco Harbor, was pretty boring and uninteresting, minus a few small things. For instance, you can see that Doom Buds get instantly activated with barrels, which I actually wasn't expecting. However, one major difference between Ricco and Gelato is that, as far as I'm aware, Gelato is not beatable with barrels. You see, in Mirror Madness, Tilt, Slam, Bam! It's pretty much impossible to get these Cataquack imposters off of the mirrors. I tried many things until I conceded and used Flood, killed Wiggler, got my prize, then went to kill Franken Wiggler. Which, by the way, the Wiggler boss battle was actually sort of made easier by the barrels since, like I said before, they instantly activate the Doom Buds. Skipping the Sandbird, I absolutely demolished Piantissimo, what's new, then fought Shadow Mario after doing the 8 red coins, which I'm also skipping. Gelato Shadow Mario was perhaps the most tedious. Yeah, that was only a small portion of the overall fight. Anyways, it's time for Pinna Park, which opened up with a mandatory failure. Not only is the only way to damage Mecha Bowser done with water rockets, but they also use up water from Flood's tank. Oh yeah, and if it isn't obvious, there's absolutely no way to carry a barrel on the roller coaster anyways. But past that, and skipping Pinna 2 was Pinna 3. This level actually provided a few platforming challenges, along with another funny animation. One of the more challenging aspects was jumping and grabbing onto this grate, but once I did, I pressed the wrong button and jumped off. Luckily, anticipating my own stupidity, I made a save state before I jumped off and was able to grab my red coin after pressing the correct button. And this last red coin took some brain power to get as well, but once I figured it out, it was time for the next level. After I collected the Shine Sprite in an absolutely epic manner, The Snooza Koopas in Pinna 4 were pretty easy, but Pinna 5 is where I'd encounter my first real challenge. Throughout this playthrough, most of everything had been pretty easy and mostly tedious, but getting up to the giant Electro Koopa was not easy and tedious, but it was actually a bit hard, but unfortunately still tedious. So basically, to get up to the top, I had to keep making use of I actually don't know what this movement tech is called, but it's basically a GWK but from grates. In other words, I got into Y-Cam just before I jumped, which makes Mario jump the opposite way than he's supposed to. This was incredibly useful for circumnavigating the use of Flood. However, I hit a roadblock. You see, this next jump was simply too big to cross. Luckily, there's actually a super easy way to get past that jump, which is to just walk around it, basically. I actually forgot you could get behind the Ferris wheel from this way, so this was a little unexpected for me. After doing a simple spin jump followed by a Y-turn, I was able to get Mario onto the grid. The first thing to do was to get rid of the Electro Koopa blocking my way, so I had to take out the other Electro Koopa so I could do that. Once the way was cleared, I clambered over to the other side where I encountered the hardest jump yet. No, not this one, but this one. I basically had to find a way to get from the green area to the area above. Now, this jump took far more tries than I'm gonna show, but after getting a perfect timing on this movement tech that I still don't know what to call, I made it up to the next area. And after another jump, I could utilize a spin jump to get to the giant Electro Koopa. Now, it took me a while to figure out that I could just, drop the barrel to kill this guy. I haven't highlighted this yet, but the only way to grab onto a grate from below while holding a barrel is to use one of the panels, meaning you can't just jump and grab hold of a grate that's above Mario while he's carrying a barrel. After Pinna 5 and skipping Pinna 6 because it was easy, I took out Shadow Mario as usual. Now, moving into Sirena Beach, I actually used a barrel clip to get into Sirena because I couldn't be bothered to steal Yoshi from Shadow Mario. And this is how I entered Sirena for each episode. And much like Pinna Park, Sirena Beach had an autofail right in the first episode. It is absolutely beyond me as to why Nintendo did this, but the Manta Ray can only take damage from Flood's water and not water from barrels. Considering that barrels work for goop, damaging enemies, opening end portals, etc., this was just kind of bizarre. So I had to open fire on the Manta and then move on to the next level, which we're gonna skip because it's boring. As for Sirena 3, I learned that you can't clip to the Shine Sprite without using a barrel, so I had to do it the old-fashioned way, except using barrels, of course. The second thing I learned from this episode is that this is supposed to be a mirror. For some reason, it turns black when Mario jumps through it, but it turns back into a mirror somehow. And after playing an extended game of RNG, I got Yoshi, opened the pool, went back for a barrel, then collected the Shine Sprite with a barrel in hand. And we go to the casino. Oh boy. The casino absolutely 100% sucked ass. First were the slot machines. The one on the right, which theoretically should act the same as normal, took way too many tries to get a 777. As for the broken slot machine, it sucked even more. To my discredit though, I kinda tried to just brute force it at first. I then tried in vain to see if there was a way to do casino skip with a barrel, which if there is, I couldn't find it. After that, I went back to the broken slot machine, and with a strategy and save states, was able to get a 777, only to be rewarded with hell itself. So long. It took me so long to complete this. I'm of course gonna spare you the tedium, but just know that this took me well over 2 hours. I even tried resorting to barrel stacking, which again was in vain, so I sucked it up. And finally, after so many tries, got lucky enough to unlock the warp pipe. And of course, the secret was infinitely easier. And then King Boo, like every other boss up to this point, went exactly as you'd expect. The only mildly difficult part was that he kept spawning boos, but still that wasn't really that hard. I promptly beat Bianco and moved on to Sirena 6. It wasn't too hard, although I did die once. And finally, for Sirena was Shadow Mario, who for once wasn't completely mind-numbing. I accidentally found a way to dump almost all the water from the barrel onto him at once, so that actually sped things up considerably. Now, skipping past Noki 1, the only interesting thing about Noki 2 was this race I had to do. Sure, I could have put a barrel closer to the shifting wall thing, but it was more fun that way. Otherwise, Noki 2 was as easy as usual, and as for Noki 3, I actually slightly moved Mario's spawn so I could pick up a barrel before entering the bottle. Minus me almost killing Mario due to my own inability to make simple jumps, I'm actually super glad I moved his spawn since I got to see this beautiful monstrosity of an animation. And as for the bottle itself, I learned something pretty important, which is that Mario cannot pick up barrels while he's in his deep underwater state. I, however, was still able to collect the red coins using a bastardized version of the hoverless strats. And then, moving on to the eel, yeah, as you could probably expect by the fact that Mario can't pick up barrels while he's in his deep underwater state, I unfortunately had to fail the challenge once again to kill, or rather help, Eely Mouth. After that, I decimated Piantissimo, but then encountered a rather challenging jump in Noki 6. After learning I could do a wall slide on that small piece of geometry, however, I was able to do a fairly precise GWK to make it up and enter the secret. And in the secret, I blundered very hard right before the finish line. After redoing that secret, it was time for Tedious Mario, Mario, then time for some epic gaming. You see, what do I mean by epic gaming? You might be asking. Well, you see, to even gain access to Pianta Village, I had to pull a page from the Max % Pacifist book and barrel stack my way up to the top of the Shine Gate. If you're interested to learn more about barrel stacking, be sure to check out my episode of Super Mario Sunshine Experiments on barrels. I don't even mind coming off as unhumble about it. That video is still my highest production quality video, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Anyways, back to barrel stacking. I took an embarrassingly long time to make it onto my first barrel, and even got blue ball on one of my attempts. But after many tries, I finally made it onto the barrel. Barrel-y. I then went ahead and got my second barrel in place, and after less tries, but still a lot of tries, I got back onto the first barrel and jumped on the second one and then onto the Shine Gate. As for Pianta 1, it was a cakewalk, as the barrels actually instantly cool off the chain chomplets. As for Pianta 2, Piantissimo for once actually gave me a run for my money and actually won twice. But on my third race, I was able to beat him in a photo finish. And as for the Goopy Inferno, it actually was debatably made easier with barrels. I say debatably because while I could skip all of the normal stuff you'd have to do to get to the golden mushroom, I actually had to make a special barrel setup just to get to the top of the mushroom to save the mayor. And even still, the jump took a while to make, especially when I forgot to bring a barrel up to clean the mayor. And even then, that barrel didn't clean all the goop off of him, so I had to get another barrel from spawn, and then just to be safe, since I don't know if this level counted as a point A to point B level, I grabbed one more barrel to collect the Shine Sprite with. Pianta 4 was easy, so I moved on to Pianta 5, where I made this sick rebound throw with a papaya to get Yoshi. And then, after entering the secret, with a barrel of course, it was time to get serious. So, just to bring everyone up to speed, the way you normally complete the Pianta 5 secret is by talking to these guys, the Chucksters. Once you talk to them, they will, well, Chuck Mario. The problem here is that this is a point A to point B level, and since Mario apparently doesn't know how to talk and hold something at once, my only option quickly became barrel stacking, and lots of it. So I'm obviously not going to show all of the individual barrel stacks I did in this level, but just know that I spent about 3 hours here. The beginning part wasn't too bad, since I only had to stack 3 barrels before I could make a spin jump to the next platform, and then quickly began stacking more barrels so I could make a jump to the third platform, and well, you get the pattern. That's how it went for the entire time. I claimed my new stack and spin jump to the next platform, and so on and so forth. Although one thing I do want to show you guys was that how precarious this actually was. Here I am on the third platform, barrel stacking my way up to the fourth. And I decided for this specific stack that I would climb up without the use of save states, for the sake of content. Yeah, subscribe fools. Anyways, this was actually incredibly nerve-wracking, and my palms were sweating the entire time, and something mom spaghetti, I don't know. I even almost failed right here, which almost gave me a heart attack. Surprisingly, however, I actually did make it up to the top of my first attempt. Anyways, moving on from that, I made a stack to get to the final platform before the Shine Sprite, and something you may have noticed if you have a sharp eye is that I decided to not put barrels on the final platform. This was purely for some added difficulty and nothing else. Basically, I had to jump back and forth platforms to get barrels for my final stack. And actually, surprisingly, I had to take this a step further because I needed more barrels than I provided on this platform. I had to get back to previous platforms and borrow some of the barrels I didn't use in order to finish the stack. But once I finished, man oh man, just take a look at this beautiful creation. And with the use of save states, of course, I was able to maneuver Mario to the top with barrel in hand. I then made my jump for freedom, and freedom was what I got. Kind of. I still had more levels to complete for this challenge, of course. But before we move on to those levels, I just want to showcase what I left the Pianta 5 secret looking like. This is among one of my favorite things I've ever been able to do in a video game ever. Okay, now it's time to move on to Pianta 6. And Pianta 6, unfortunately, had yet another point of failure. You see, with the kid Piantas, I just couldn't clean them fast enough with barrels. With the adult Piantas, you normally only need 2 barrels, maybe 1 if you're lucky. Anyways, after embarrassingly missing my Shine Sprite, I moved on to our final Shadow Mario stage, and oh boy, was I ecstatic to never have to do this again. After only about 8 minutes, as I was getting pretty good at Shadow Mario with barrels, it was time to move on to the flooded plaza, and then, of course, Corona Mountain. Inside the volcano, the gauntlet of challenges became a lot more gauntletly and challengey. I'm not going to go over each obstacle in detail for a reason you'll see in a minute, but I do want to highlight how I got past this final section with only 3 barrels because I'm kind of proud of it. Basically, what I had to do was this. First, I had to place a barrel on the spike platform, taking care not to get Mario killed. Then, I came back with another barrel, ground pounded this barrel until it put out the fire on the next platform over, then quickly got this barrel placed down on this spike platform. I then had to rush to get back to narrowly avoid the fire coming back on this platform. I then extinguished that fire again, this time just from the starting area, then made my way over to the second spike platform quickly to get this barrel down near the first fire platform. I then picked up the barrel I placed here earlier, then after too many attempts, finally was able to RNG out this fire, from where I jumped to the next spike platform, extinguished the final fire platform with the barrel Mario was carrying, and made my way to the mud boat, which I obviously couldn't operate, so I instead started level over and used the swim in the lava glitch to get to the end, making all those platforming shenanigans obsolete. Now, since we're so close to the end and what I tried next was overall pretty boring, I'm gonna try and summarize everything I tried to get up to Bowser with. I tried stacking barrels on top of their skewed collisions for way too long, used Flood to see if I could barrel stack on top of the Zone boat, I couldn't, tried stacking barrels on their skewed collisions again, but after it started to get really weird, buggy, and just tedious, I said F it, I'm just gonna use rocket storage. Now, I think there's a TAS only strat to get up the volcano floodless, so it's theoretically possible, maybe, but that's where I'm gonna leave it for now because it's time for the Bowser and Bowser Jr. fight. So for the Bowser fight, the plan was to, you're never gonna guess this one, barrel stack. After learning that the different sections of the hot tub arms act like different objects, at least when it comes to barrel stacking, I was quickly able to get my first barrel stacked. I was then able to get my second one stacked, even higher of course, and eventually I got a third one up there too. And from the third one, I was able to deliver the first blow to Bowser, or his hot tub rather. I was actually pretty stoked about this because I wasn't sure how high I'd have to barrel stack to achieve this, or if it would even be possible. But luckily it seemed 100% possible to beat Bowser without Flood and just barrels. Keyword there is seemed. You see, unfortunately, when it came time to get barrels onto the second platform, they'd fall through it once Mario was far away enough. I guess its collision deactivates for game performance or something like that, so unfortunately my only option was to pull out the rocket nozzle and finish the job without barrels. I finally delivered the final blow and ended my barrels only playthrough on a rather low note. Well, that's what I would have said if I were up. So obviously there wasn't a workaround to getting the barrels to stay with the deactivating collision and all, but given the nature of this challenge is that I get to bin edit levels to make this challenge possible in the first place, it was only natural that I did the same thing here. At first I was just going to place barrels next to each super ground pound area, but I thought that was kinda lame, so I put only 3 barrels on the platform closest to Mario's spawn, put some more platforms around that don't have quantum collision, and went on from there. Basically, the new goal here was to get barrels from spawn to the platform so that Mario would never be far away enough from the super ground pound platforms to disable their collision. Oh yeah, and I decided to even add one more restriction to make this a little bit more challenging. I now could only barrel stack 2 barrels at once. That meant I had to be extra efficient with my barrel stacking heights in order to get enough space for Mario's super ground pound to activate and destroy the platform. After I quickly dispatched the first platform, it was time to move the barrels over to my next target. In order to do so, I actually first had to bait Bowser into breathing fire in the opposite direction that I wanted to go because I obviously can't make it over the fire without the rocket nozzle. I then stacked 2 of my barrels and destroyed the second platform. Now, something I should highlight here, if you haven't noticed or don't already know, is that with every next platform destroyed, Bowser Jr. starts to send out more and more bullet bills at Mario. Normally, it's not that huge of a platform since they're easily outmaneuvered or destroyed, but when carrying a barrel, on the other hand, it quickly becomes a bullet hell. And what's more annoying is that the blue ones, if they miss Mario, tend to turn back around and surprise attack him. Anyways, with a surprisingly low barrel stack, I was able to take out the third, then fourth platform. And so naturally, after Bowser nearly fried Mario to death, it was time to take out the fifth and final platform. And man, this one gave me trouble. For some reason, I was having a lot of difficulty getting the barrels to properly barrel stack here. It seemed like this platform just followed its own rules compared to the others, but after my refusal to give up, I finally got a barrel to teleport up into the air, which followed many attempts. I then was easily able to get the second barrel in place, and finally delivered my final blow to the hot tub. While I wasn't able to beat Super Mario Sunshine with only barrels, I think I came considerably close. Either way, I'd like to thank all of you who stuck around and watched through this. Unfortunately, this playthrough took much longer than I initially anticipated, which was around 10 hours, and therefore this video was longer than I had hoped. I was hoping to get somewhere around the 15 to 20 minute mark, but as of recording this, it appears I went considerably over it. I just hope that despite that you all enjoyed the video and found it entertaining, and looking forward, I have 2 videos planned for the immediate future. And most intriguing is that one of these videos is yet another video related to barrels in Super Mario Sunshine. I just can't get away from them. It's probably gonna be another Super Mario Sunshine Experiments mini, so keep an eye out for that in the next few weeks. It's actually pretty interesting and clears up some misconceptions about a certain specific barrel. Anyways, I've been Angry Max, and remember to like, comment, sub, hit the bell, all that YouTube stuff I'm probably supposed to tell you, look at graph, whatever, and later.